Hello and welcome everyone to an engaging webinar where we'll chat about collaborative leadership. Before I introduce my guests, I want to say thank you to everyone who is in the virtual room with us today. We have folks from Pittsburgh, from Florida Atlantic, from Tennessee and Calgary, UK, Boston, and many more places. So thanks so much for engaging in the chat already. And I encourage you to do so throughout this next hour that we have together. We have opportunities for you throughout this time we have together to not only engage in the chat, but ask questions of our expert panelists and shout out in polls and Slido. So we've got a few different activities for you. We hope you'll engage throughout. So a couple of little bits of housekeeping before we get going. Please feel free at any time during the webinar or after to click on the call to action button to learn more about the collaborative leadership efforts being done by Study Group and Florida Atlantic. Some of the case studies you'll have a chance to download to learn more about what our special guests are about to share with you today. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce my friends and colleagues. So first up, we have Mihaela Metianu, the Assistant Provost for Global Engagement at Florida Atlantic University. And we're also joined by Alex Marston, Vice President of Partnership Development at Study Group. So during this time that we have together, we're going to talk about such things as operationalizing transparency and building trust. Ethical leadership will take center stage today in our discussion. As I said, we'll talk about case studies and insights, some leadership strategies, results, and rewards. So if there's something that we haven't talked about that you'd like to hear about, be sure and put it in the chat or ask a question. So, Mihaela, talk to us about collaborative leadership. Will you set the stage for us and open this up about what our discussion will entail today?
Of course. So first, hello from Boca Raton, Florida. Here at Florida Atlantic University, we're only a mile and a half from the beach, and I always want to take the opportunity to brag about that. We're very fortunate in our location. On the screen, you see just a brief overview of information about our institution. We're a public higher education institution, one of 12 in the state of Florida, about 30,000 students, about to become Research One in fall 2025. We serve a variety of students, including about 1,700 international students. And now I would like to turn it over to Alex to say a few things about Study Group. And to set the stage for the two of us and our organizations, we have been in partnership for about 2 or 3 years. We have had several cohorts of students enroll as a result of this partnership. But we're here to talk not about just the specific case study, but also about how you can leverage collaborative leadership in any type of setting, any type of partnership. We're just going to happen to use a recruitment model partnership for the conversation today. So we can move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Mihaela. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and very early good morning to some of you I can see today. Really appreciate you all being on this webinar. And Mihaela, Mo, and myself are really looking forward to this discussion. Before we get into the meat of the discussion and talking about those strategies and actions, just for those of you that don't know who Study Group is, as well as partnering with Florida Atlantic, we're an international education organization that have been working for over 30 years, supporting international students to achieve those their overseas education goals. In that time, we've supported over 100,000 students into programs in a mix of direct admit, pathway, and online taught programs. In the latter two of which we've actually got over 500 academic programs created and taught by Study Group staff. How we recruit the students, as many of you I think on this call will be familiar, it's through a lot of in-market work. We have 500 staff across our recruitment, admissions, and marketing based around the world, supporting over 3,500 agents who are helping those students to achieve their international study goals. From a North America context, we work with 11 partners here, including Florida Atlantic here in the US. So that's the high-level view of Study Group, and now we're keen to get into what this webinar is all about.
Okay, so now's the time to take out your phone, unless you're already on your phone. If you're watching this from your PC, your laptop, you can take out your phone and go on slido.com. The entrance code is listed up there, 3119144. On the Slido, we have a poll for you. What does collaborative leadership mean to you? The link to the Slido is also in the chat. Thanks so much to my colleague Kim for popping that up there. So you can either click on the link or log into it from your phone or laptop. So what does collaborative leadership mean to you? We hear that term often. We also hear terms very similar to that: shared leadership, distributed leadership, collective leadership. So when you hear collaborative leadership, what are some of the first things that come to mind? Let's get a little word cloud going. And if for some reason you can't access the Slido, no worries. You can feel free to enter your comments in the chat. If you can put it in the Slido, even better though, because we want to create a word cloud so we can get a visual representation of what some of those key pieces that rise to the top when you hear the term collective leadership. Looking at the folks here in the chat room, I see we have many leaders with us today. So we know that leadership can look different in different organizations and with different leadership styles. So what are some of those things that really resonate with you around collective leadership? Okay, all right, so we've got an answer in the chat. We're waiting for the Pi team to pull up that Slido so we can see that word cloud, see what it looks like. In the meantime, I see working together for a common goal. And I know my fellow panelists would agree to that. And we're going to talk about that working together, shared goals. What does collaborative leadership mean to you? There's another way to access this Slido. You can just scan the QR code. Here we are. All right, Mihaela, Alex. Some key themes coming across here.
Yeah, and looking at this is my first time looking at such a word cloud, and it's not surprising to me that some of those the words coming out: partnership, listening, trust. I mean, those are absolutely, those are words which perhaps won't be a surprise. You'll hear a theme running through what Mihaela and I are going to talk about. So really, those three at the top here. Transparency. God, I mean, I think someone's actually read the slide deck that we're putting together. This is, yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Balance is coming up as key. Reciprocity and partnership, certainly. Also, some additional answers in the chat as well, helping teams get things done.
Yes.
And that's a big part of your presentation as well, is not just the theory and the research behind collaborative leadership, but what are some of those actionable steps that leaders can take away with them after today and perhaps implement or enhance in their own institutions and organizations?
Yes, and indeed the non-hierarchical collaborations are so important, because often the best collaborations are when you have cross-sectional teams with people who are there for their expertise and contribution, and not necessarily just for their position in the organization. And that's really also a good way to develop new leaders and give everyone an opportunity to shine or to excel at something that they can contribute to the team with.
Some other really interesting responses here that just jump out at me. Oh, reciprocity, I said, is on there. Visionary is on there. Fantastic. Not top down. Results. Study group got a shout out there on the word cloud.
I didn't write that one. I'll be honest, that was not me. So.
Well done. Oh, here's one from the chat too. Tangible mutual success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing your responses up in there. There's still some answers being added there. And hopefully we can share a screenshot of this out with the follow-up recording to all participants too, so you can have a look at what all you've come up with as a group. But yes, those are our key words: partnership, listening, transparency, trust, and balance. Thanks. Okay. All right. So Why are we here, Alex?
So I'm looking at some of the answers from that last deck. I mean, it's clear that people who are on this call are very understanding of what collaborative leadership means. It's a term, as Mo, as you've said, that's often discussed both within and outside the sector. And in practice, I think some of those words are bearing out from the practice that people on this call and colleagues will be much in evidence. But particularly when we're looking at global stakeholders, whether that's institution to institution, third party service providers, government affiliated organizations, and certainly, last but not least, students and families who are looking for that international education experience. What we found, though, and I think is increasingly talked about in our sector, is that it's sometimes harder to see that collaborative leadership approach within our own organizations, whether that's because the nature of the institution or the organization and the silos that can sometimes manifest, whether it's how international students, particularly in the North America space, are sometimes the management of those within an institution can be spread across multiple departments or faculties, or there's a variety of reasons to why that could provoke a challenge. So knowing that that's an ongoing discussion, what we thought today is what we would like to discuss is how can we address those challenges and offer practical insight and action. And from that, using Florida Atlantic's approach that they've had over the last few years, and the inclusion of study group within that approach and the partnership that we've had. So setting the stage really for looking at a bit of a deep dive into Florida Atlantic. What have we done in terms of collaborative leadership over the last few years?
Before we get into that, I have to note the photo there, and someone else has picked up on it as well. Sea turtle research at FAU, Mihaela?
Yes. Yes, we actually have a place called Gumbo Limbo, which is one of the places where we take international students to on mini trips, but it's really kind of a research lab / opportunity for the local community or visitors to see what goes on in terms of research. Sea turtles is a big one there. And one of my dreams is still to see sea turtles, coming out of their eggshells, but I haven't gotten there yet. So yes, definitely.
Thanks so much. All right. So experts in marine science and oceanography, on to the next poll question. So here on the Crowdcast app, we're going to ask you, how frequently are you seeing collaborative leadership used effectively in your workplace? And that will help us frame the rest of the conversation today. Very frequently, 1, all the way up to number 4, which is no, never at all. So if you can please log into that poll and let us know 1 through 4. How frequently are you seeing collaborative leadership used effectively in your workplace? And the poll is to your right by clicking the question icon. All right, curious to see what numbers are going to come up for us. Sorry, the people icon. Click on the people icon and you'll get to the polls.
And speaking of collaboration, one of my colleagues from Florida Atlantic actually put some information in the chat about the marine science and oceanography program. And someone else put something about research on ecosystems, specifically on sea turtles. So here we're demonstrating by example.
So for me on my screen, it's the third icon down, it's the graph, and it says poll. So if you click on that, the poll should come up and you can enter 1 through 4. We've already had someone enter in the chat 5. So they are really going to be looking forward, I'm sure, to the strategies and the action steps that you're about to share with us. So, well, you're in the right place. Fear not. All right. So how are we coming with the polls, Pi team? Okay. All right. So with 50% of the vote, we have 2, often, but we're lacking innovation. And I noticed innovation came up in the chat as one of those pieces in our first question. What do you think of when you think of collaborative leadership? Innovation came up as one of the answers in the chat. So, folks are saying that's one of the things that's lacking, that's needed. They've identified it as needed, but it's lacking. So I know that you have some innovative strategies that you're going to be sharing with us. So fantastic. We've got 20% of the folks online right now are at 1. Very frequently, we are trailblazers. And then coming in at 30% is 3. Not very often. Our leaders are very siloed. And then not too many. The last one, number 4, at 2 votes with 5% is never, not at all. All right, so the majority is number 2. So that's great to know what it looks like in your organizations, in your institutions. Now we're going to find out what it looks like for this partnership between Study Group and Florida Atlantic University. Next slide, thanks.
All right, so I'm happy to chat about this, and Alex, feel free to contribute as needed. So in terms of collaborative leadership, before I go into specifics, I think that we, as international educators, are actually very skilled at this, because a lot of the work we do requires a lot of collaboration with very diverse group of collaborators, right? Sometimes within our institution, sometimes overseas, sometimes higher administration, sometimes students. I mean, we really, run the gamut, and we're quite good at it if we've done it for a while, but we don't always think about how do we actually take all of that wealth of skill and ability and sort of either lead or maybe influence or contribute to a meaningful collaboration, right? Here are a few things that I think are important for a successful collaboration. The collaboration should be intentional, meaningful, generative, and also it should have some output goals, right? Because we love the process, but we want results, right? We all about the process, but we need to see some results to keep going, right? So I'll talk about these items in the context of the partnership between Florida Atlantic and Study Group. And please feel free to also add in the chat, if you have your own examples or questions, et cetera, et cetera. So in fall of 2021, I can't say after the pandemic, but after sort of we thought we could maybe get out of it, we started looking for a recruiting partner for growing our international student numbers in a meaningful way and in a sustainable long-term way. And we identified Study Group as a potential partner, reached out, and they fortunately responded. But it took quite a while for us. There was a lot of research back and forth. If any of you have third-party partners for recruiting or any other activities on campus, you know that sometimes you may not find out about it until the agreement has already been signed. And that's one way to do it. And then you have to kind of figure out how to get things done from there. At Florida Atlantic, we didn't do it that way. We did it, I think, in the best possible way, which was on both sides, we did a lot of research about each other. We had many conversations. At Florida Atlantic, we involved many departments, academic leaders, to make sure that they were also interested in the same goals, that they saw the same vision, or that we could find ways to really implement this partnership at Florida Atlantic. So there was a lot of intentionality behind it. We then identified that we had some programs and areas of study where absolutely we could have a win-win collaboration between Florida Atlantic and Study Group. And we proceeded very specifically in working with promoting our programs in engineering and computer science. So not the whole of Florida Atlantic at the graduate level, just very select programs. And then at the undergraduate level, it was more general. that helped us to really focus, right? It helped us to focus on what we wanted to accomplish. The other thing that was important for us is to have a meaningful partnership. Okay, if you have something that is valued on both sides, right, you're going to be more willing to go to work, right? Because this is not easy, right? Nothing worth doing is really easy. It takes, it can be frustrating at times. It can be very rewarding at times, exhilarating. You run the gamut of emotions, you have doubts along the way. But if you know that in the end it's going to have a good result, then you keep going for it. And the other one is generative or maybe regenerative, right? You have to be able to not just generate new outcomes, but generate ideas, be innovative, right? That's one thing that we saw coming up several times already. Be able to go back to the drawing board, redo things, rethink things, and do that without fear, right? Because often the lack of innovation or creativity comes from the fact that we're afraid to try new things because we may fail, right? Failure is, we love success and we hate failure. So sometimes you do have to try things. Not everything that we did worked out perfectly, right? We, for example, had to tweak our admissions requirements, our processes several times. We still do, by the way, on an ongoing basis, right? We still meet every 2 weeks with some of the colleagues from study group. We still meet monthly after 3 years. It's not one and done. You have to keep at it consistently. And then you have to be able to see the results and then share in sort of the benefits of those results, right? You have to know, what is your output? What do we want to get out of it? Yes, we want to build capacity in some of our graduate programs in engineering and computer science. We want to see a particular type of student enroll. We want to see the offices and colleagues that have worked at it be rewarded. And I mean rewarded in every sense of the word, right? The word has to be recognized, and then we can go back and figure out how to adjust things to maybe improve on how we get to that output, right? Improve the process to get to the output. Also, as you know, our market, so to speak, international recruitment and enrollment is very fluid, right? It's not easy, when someone asks you, okay, can you give me a model for the next 2 years? Yes, you can give them a model, but you really can't predict every change that's going to happen in the market, every political situation, natural events, things that are completely outside of our control, right? So if you have a process that's intentional, meaningful, generative, then you can work through those uncertainties together and be innovative without necessarily being worried that if you maybe fail in one aspect, you can't go back and rethink things, that's the end of it. So I'm just going to pause there and perhaps move on to the next slide and give Alex an opportunity to share some thoughts with us as well.
And Mihaela, thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say, as you were talking, it gave me ideas, it gave me questions. I've written down some questions that I'm really eager to ask you after the presentation, and I'm going to encourage everyone who's in the room with us today to also go ahead and ask those questions, and you can use the icon to the right of your screen with the question mark in it. Alex.
Thanks, Mo, and thank you, Mihaela, and what a wonderful context setting for the partnership. I want to move quickly through to the lessons for everybody to absorb as to that Mihaela's touched on a couple of those examples already. But before I do, just to set that outcome-orientated approach, well, what is the outcome for the partnership thus far? As Mihaela said, we began working 3 years ago together. The first cohort we had was in fall 22. By fall 23, the partnership between Florida Atlantic and Study Group resulted in 65% of all international cohorts coming from the partnership, which is a wonderful result. It's seen as a success. I think I can speak on behalf of both organizations that it's a success across the board in that regard, but not just because of the numbers, but because of that approach and the collaborative engagement. Mihaela's just touched on a couple of the very specific tangibles, the fortnight, the 2 weekly meetings we have on admissions side, the monthly check-ins we have at a senior leadership side. But there's a lot more to it as to how we collaborated. So where we're going to go now is looking at 7 key takeaway examples that we think make this partnership the success that it is, not just between Study Group and Florida Atlantic, but also within the organizations itself. And we want to share those with you all here on this call. What you're going to see is not rocket science. And in fact, some of the words that you're going to see in these key elements have already been seen in the cloud. So it shows that we're all thinking along the same lines. What we want to show here, though, is the context as to why those elements are important and why they have been important from our partnership perspective. So with that, we're going to move into the 7 elements for success. The first of these is be transparent, and that was one of the words that came up. Transparency earns trust. And the way that we approached this with our partnership was that we focused on providing not just regular updates, but also data-driven proposals, and reflecting both the challenges and the opportunities, both prior to and during the launch of the partnership. Sometimes it's not easy to provide that data, and I think, from our perspective as being market experts with people in market, we know that can be a challenge, particularly as we go through recruitment periods. That transparency, though, was critical as to what we had shared, what we couldn't share at that time, to make informed decisions. And being informed at every step of the way is critical. Mihaela's touched on this already, but the example I think is one of the best that we see here is the admissions processes and how we have consistently tweaked those processes throughout, according to the market movements that we've seen over the last couple of years. And we know that sometimes decisions can take time, and therefore being transparent consistently has been critical to help both within Study Group and within Florida Atlantic to make those in-time decisions as needed. So for that, transparency is critical and an absolute bedrock of our partnership. So that's the first. We're then going to move on to the second, and I'll hand over to Mihaela for this.
Sure. So another thing that I believe contributed to our success and perhaps can be replicated in a variety of types of partnerships or collaborations is focus on the early adopters. What do we mean by that? There will be people in your organizations that are going to be just as excited as you are about this potential collaboration or partnership. Find them, know them, and work with them and get them to be your cheerleaders. And perhaps they can also help communicate the message to others who they may have some traction with. These are the individuals who are probably going to help solidify the collaboration, kind of stick with you when things are getting maybe more difficult. And they are the ones who are more likely to feel excited about innovation. You know who they are. They are across your organization, and they deserve your time up front because they're going to help you along the way. On the other end of the spectrum, right, you also have to be ready to have some tough conversations, right? And those are very important. It's important to be upfront and not shy away from the difficult questions. So one example that I can give from our experience is, okay, anytime that you have someone else representing your university, so you can bring up the third point on the slide if you don't mind, okay, the tough conversations. So anytime you work with someone outside of your organization, especially if you're a university, right, it's really important that everyone feels comfortable that this organization will represent you well and recruit the students that you want in your program, right? And there are people that doubt that, right? And you have to have those conversations. How are you going to make sure that your program is well represented? Give us some examples. We want to maintain our academic standards. It's difficult to work with so many international students. We can't accommodate them in housing, right? Those are all tough conversations. Those are simple, basic examples, but and they can be frustrating, but just keep at it, work with those individuals, and eventually they will become also your adopters. Maybe not everybody, but many of them will. Now I'll pass it back to Alex.
Thank you, Mihaela. And then the fourth element, which was critical for our success here, was investing in resources. And I think for the message to any organization or institution that is looking to make a step change in international recruitment, student recruitment, it's not going to come without doing anything different. I think the key here is, though, that it wasn't just about making an investment, it was how we make the investment and that collaborative approach. So the way that we looked at starting out was, look, what are the key areas in which we require that investment? And then it wasn't just a case of one side has to do it, the other side sits back. It was collectively and collaboratively looking at what that resource would look like and how both sides can contribute, whether it was in direct dollar terms or in time spent, but indirectly by time from both sides as to who needs to spend the time on that particular area, and what both sides would then bring to the table. An example for this as to how this really bore fruit, there's actually two here. We look at the admissions functions from the start of the application right through to the student arriving on campus, and providing all of that documentation for them to start in time. And also the second is in-market activity, both the pre and post launches, and doing things together and investing that time and money, quite frankly, into making sure we were making as big a bang as possible when promoting Florida Atlantic. And with that, I'll pass back to Mihaela.
Thank you, Alex. Also, it's been important for us, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, is you have to remain continuously engaged and maintain momentum. So building that excitement and the initial conversations and the collaborations initially is very important. But remember that all of our colleagues have many things on their plate, not just our project or our collaboration, or people change roles, and we may have new individuals that we have to engage. So we have to continuously keep the conversation. It's like rebooting your computer, right? You have to be able to restart, remind individuals of what it is that we're working on together. In this case, for example, we, in addition to all of those ongoing meetings that we discussed, we also have once a term larger meetings where we really invite department chairs, we invite students, we invite individuals from the financial services, from other areas of the university, to re-engage them and kind of gauge how are things going from their perspective, right? Because from my perspective, they're going great, but I am not in the classroom with the students. I may not be aware of everything that is going on and the challenges that they may be facing in working with a larger number of international students in this case, right? Or maybe how are they able to accommodate, or how are they able to discuss things like academic integrity? We need to kind of keep that momentum going and stay engaged with all of our different stakeholders. And now I will pass it back to Alex for some more of his thoughts.
Yeah, and thank you, Mihaela. And academic integrity, institutional integrity, is very much at the heart of some of the sixth element, the adopting the spirit of compromise. As I think is very clear to you all now, we have constant discussions between both study group and Florida Atlantic across a range of points and areas within the partnership. And quite often, both sides are coming with slightly different perspectives when we start those discussions. I think what is clear is that, and I will use what somebody put on the word cloud, or I think several people put on the word cloud, listening is a critical part to collaborative leadership. And that spirit of compromise, the listening, is such an important part. And without wanting to raise ourselves up too much, but I do think the element between both organizations, the listening, is critical here. Striking the balance between in-market opportunity and then that academic institutional integrity, critical to all of those discussions. Our North Star always is the student success. And I think that informs and helps when we're looking at any topics for discussion, where there is at the beginning of it a slightly different perspective. Mihaela's talked of one example already, I'll reiterate it here, looking at those localized entry requirements for particular source markets and what they could mean to be, and how we get to a point where both sides feel comfortable that we're striking that right balance between the opportunity and making sure that student success and the academic integrity remains intact. So that's our six, and now leading you up to the final one, Mihaela, back to you.
Yes, this is really hard to do because we do want to do everything everywhere all at once, just like the movie says. But it's not possible, right? You can't do everything all at once, right? Sometimes you have to break things down in smaller components. And one of my colleagues here at Florida Atlantic works in a different department. You know, we're having a conversation about another project, and she said, Mihaela, focus on short-term wins while building your long-term plans. And that really stuck with me, right? So you have to have some short-term deliverables to keep everyone going, right? So in our case is, okay, what market, what program, what is hot right now? Where can we get students at the caliber that we want so we can really show everyone how successful this partnership can be, right? So for us, no surprise, many of you probably looked in that direction, but we've had a really great success in India and from the get-go, right? So we were able to recruit a lot of students from that particular country. But our long-term plans are really to have a diverse group of students who come from different areas of the world, and we're building towards that. And now I saw a question about KPIs, right? One of our KPIs is to diversify our pool of applicants and admitted students. And that's one measure is do we want to have a diversity of representation in our international student population. And we do have over 100 countries represented. So while the numbers may not all be as high as India, we do continue to grow in terms of the diversity of our student body, our international student body. And I think I will stop here also in the interest of time. We can maybe move on to the next slide. I think we're getting close to the Q&A part, which is where I'm most interested in hearing the questions and having a conversation with our audience today.
And I'm going to ask our audience members to please put their questions actually in the chat today and not in the Q&A feature. So if you could please put your questions, comments in the chat for our panelists, that would be fantastic. And I see that there's already some in there. And if you're ready to kick it off with this one, what's one pitfall that you'd warn others not to fall into when you're seeking an effective partnership?
A pitfall.
Yeah, anything that you want to avoid?
I think it's important to avoid preconceived notions of what that partnership may be. Yeah. Right? Because we're not blank slates, right? We have our own experiences with working with our institutional partners internally, externally. And no matter how open-minded we think we are, those things do peek in, right? So, if you've worked with a recruiter, for example, and your experience wasn't that great, maybe you're going to be a little reluctant to try it again, right? So that is important to keep an open mind. And for me, that, we've tried that before, it doesn't work. Well, maybe you need to try it differently, right? And that I think that's it sounds very simple, but we all fall into that, and it's important to try and just be aware of our own biases or whatever our previous experiences were and stay open-minded.
Yeah, I think from my side, I'll flip it around a little bit, but re-emphasizing one of the key elements here that from our perspective is making sure we have that the wider stakeholder engagement. And I guess the pitfall is just, making sure that it's not just within one area of an institution, because that can, I think, across all of the partnerships that we have, we see that engagement always spreads wider, whether it's in the beginning or throughout the journey with that partner. So starting at the beginning and making sure that engagement is as wide as possible is a really helpful way to success.
Thanks so much, both. The next two questions actually go hand in hand in a way. So, you talk a lot about the output, the KPIs. So what type of data do you use regularly to measure this collaborative success? And then how do you share out those outputs with stakeholders?
Well, you go first, Mihaela. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I guess I can talk a little bit about what we do internally at Florida Atlantic, and then Alex can talk about what we do together between the two organizations. So internally, we collect data and we distribute the information on a regular basis, weekly, pretty much, unless something happens and we can't do it weekly. But every week there's a report that is prepared by one of my colleagues that has information about how many applications, the location, how many students have accepted, how many visas. We all celebrate when anybody gets a visa. Okay, and then also other concerns, like, are there concerns about housing? You know, what's coming up, right? Are there concerns about housing? What are students reporting? We also, now that we have a few cohorts, right, we're looking at, you know, how long does it take students to graduate, right? What is their academic performance? Are they applying for practical training? Are they securing jobs, right? So we started this in 22, so now we're at that point where we're seeing our master students, for example, graduating and going on to their next step. So it's really important to have data available, but you know, maybe not everybody reads the report every week, but occasionally someone will come back with a question, right? We've gotten into this habit of doing it on a regular basis. And maybe Alex can give some examples of how we work together on some of those KPIs and what study group delivers for us in terms of information on a regular basis.
Yeah, and a lot of it is mirrored, I think. Thank you, Mihaela. From our perspective, we make sure that we're showing how pipeline works across each of the various stages. And there are so many stages that now are integral to looking at the success, whether it's an offer that's been issued, an application that's been accepted, a confirmed student, a student who's paid a commitment fee, and then the students who've got visas, and making sure each stage is then separated out. We do that on a frequent basis, far more frequently, as Mihaela's talked about, is having those weekly updates as to what that pipeline looks like. In particular, where it looks to the stage of where students are in the process, and if there are anything that is either stuck from a student perspective or from the partnership perspective in terms of getting that offer out. As we know, I think each year goes past, the speed and return to market, in particular some of the key markets where we see enrollment, speed is key. And having that transparency as to that data is critical, because sometimes things can get stuck, particularly when you're talking about volume, if you don't have sight of those reports. So having those regular report sessions go out is critical for us. Because at the end of the day, how we measure the success, not just in terms of enrollment, but also conversion, and making sure we're as effective and efficient as possible.
A follow-up question to this, the questions about data and measuring output, is how do you realign collaboration when those outputs or the outcomes rather, or the goals change?
That comes back to, that's a great question. I think that comes back to how that engagement piece. You know, I think let me talk about an example this year, I think, where we've seen a key market like India has shifted in terms of its patterns of recruitment into the US for a number of external factors, and how we realign looking at the engagement with that market and what that means for all of our partners is about constant communication. The data points are critical here, and this is a good example of where the data is not always forthcoming, because we're looking at data points which are coming from a myriad of sources, not always official, because it takes time for those to come through in terms of output of visas, in terms of applications being processed. But it's about constant communication for us to make sure that as long as we're keeping our partners informed, we can make those decisions. And with Florida Atlantic, that was exactly the case this year, as to looking at what happened in January and February, how we tweaked and realigned on the processes to ensure the success for fall this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of realigning the collaboration, some specific examples is we, after our initial graduate intake in the engineering and computer science, we decided to start with some additional programs from the College of Business. We identified 4. One of them is super successful. The other ones are building. But we also explored 3 graduate programs in the College of Science the feedback was that those would not necessarily attract a large number of international student applicants. It doesn't mean they're not valued, but that's not where we're going to put our marketing efforts into, right? Because that's not where we'll get the most results. And this is, we didn't just add the 3 programs, right? We had the conversation, and study group has more options than we do in terms of testing the market and getting the feedback in terms of what would be appealing to students from our sending countries. And so we decided that it's not the time to add resources in that area. And that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes we just do things because someone thinks we should do them, and we know that it's not going to give results, but we're not always comfortable saying, you know what, no, this is not where we need to put our energy. We do have finite resources, time, money, staff, energy, right? So we have to be, sometimes you do have to come back and say, okay, this is not where we can put our energy into right now.
In sort of a follow-up to that question, you talked earlier, Mihaela, about keeping the momentum. So, and we know that, things happen, you have to reschedule meetings, or, the semester ends, or people are away on holiday, et cetera. How do you, in between the times when you're gathering with these stakeholders and having these meetings with leadership, what are some ways, and this is for both of you, what are some ways to keep the momentum going, to keep the energy and the excitement about the initiatives going?
I think delivering, so the hard data is great. The numbers always are compelling, but what I found that is really compelling is out the individual stories, right? So our students have done so well, some of them have gotten fantastic internships, they have assistantships on campus. We've had some stories that were more challenging, where we were trying to help students who are in a difficult situation, and then we had a positive outcome. Keep sharing those stories too, because we know that, yes, data is great, but when you have a compelling story, it kind of connects the big picture with something that is more emotional. And I know that we can't get too touchy-feely, but it's important to have some of that story as well. So we do that. We also have a lot of engagement events on campus, and we invite our partners, both those that were the early adopters, and we also invite the resistance, because we know that when they see what we're doing together, they're more likely to sort of join on that bandwagon and become supporters.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think also that not just helps keep people engaged throughout, but it's also that those individual stories have really helped ignite, particularly where we've got people who are perhaps more reticent with the partnership and understanding what it all means, and seeing those examples really brings it to life. So I think that is really a critical element to make sure those stories continue to get told.
Yeah, there are lots of questions in the chat. And one of them actually does address this challenge about, not just working with the early adopters, but what happens with those that perhaps are not so keen, and maybe they're more resisting to what we're trying to do. And I think a good way to deal with that is actually right up front, before you enter the partnership. Just make sure you have as wide a circle as possible, and having those conversations up front about the potential and the challenges. Also, sometimes the resistance honestly also comes from either lack of information, lack of communication, and a lack of resources, right? If you just constantly ask colleagues to do more and more, but they don't see the rewards in any way, then they're less likely to assist you, and they're less likely to be excited about whatever collaboration you have. So we need to make sure we find a way at our institution to share those resources back, so that we can regenerate the enthusiasm and the excitement and the ability of people to keep going.
Yeah, I can see there's a question around marketing strategies and whether these are global campaigns specific to particular country markets and how to determine which market to target. The answer to that question, Laura, it's a little bit of a mix. Sometimes we have specific campaigns to specific markets where we see if we're looking at entry requirements that are specific to that one. For the most part, we do look at global campaigns. We tweak those as we need. We localize them as much as we can, both in terms of content as well as delivery. How do we determine? We use data as much as we can. Data points come in twofold, looking at overall macro data from Open Doors or from other government-affiliated sources, but also listening to the markets as well and hearing what they need. As I said, we've got people in market over 20 countries where we have staff based in market talking continuously to stakeholders, local stakeholders. And that's where we get a lot of our great sort of, anecdotal, but also data verifiable information as to where we need to go in some of these marketing campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another question that came through, and I'm sorry if we're skipping. They're coming through fast, so we're just gonna skip around a bit. But there is one from Helen about how do we think that international education looks different to other industries when it comes to the benefits of collaborative leadership. And I think this is one that makes me think a little bit about, we all kind of see things from our perspective, right? We're in our international education bubble, and we think this is what everybody should want to do, but it's not always the case, right? So it's important to find out, how do our private partners view higher education, international education? How do government officials, for example, perceive what it is that we're trying to do? What do visa officers think about when our students go to apply for visas and maybe they haven't heard of our institution, right? Or they wonder why should the student go to Florida Atlantic or any institution when they can go anywhere else, right? So I think that's not everyone from outside necessarily views international education or higher education in the same way. I think I can pass it on to Alex as well, because from the private sector perspective, it may be quite different from what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, Mihaela. And I think there's a lot of consensus there from a private organization as well. I think when we look at within study group and then how we look at other industries that are related outside of international education that we touch, I think in terms of benefits for collaborative leadership that come through, it really comes back to the question of integrity, both within the partnerships as well as that communication point. And those two pillars, if you like, we see throughout when we're discussing with our third-party providers in other industries that relate to what we do.
All right.
I'm just looking at, I think, Mihaela, we may have lost Mo at this point.
Yes, well, it's a live event, so that happens.
Indeed.
But anyway, I think that we can maybe just keep going through the questions. How do we see our collaborations evolving in the next few years? And, well, I feel like this is really the beginning. It's still a young partnership, only 2-3 years old. But still, it's quite robust from my perspective. And I do see us continuing to expand, not just the markets where we recruit students from, but the types of programs that we can offer, and perhaps other types of collaborations that go beyond just inbound student mobility. That's just one aspect of international education, and it's the one we're discussing today. But we definitely have many other aspects that we would like to explore together. Alex?
Yeah, agreed. I think, someone put in the word cloud innovation, and that's certainly integral to our partnership, as we move into sort of the next stage of it, beyond where we started out with the recruitment into certain programs, particularly at the graduate level. And I think, we see this as an extremely not just productive but stable and collaborative partnership, and one where we're excited for what the next few years bring. I think we're only at the beginning of our journey, 3 years in, and there's a long way to go, which will be constant. And that partnership has to, I think, by definition, constantly evolve in order to continue the success that we've seen so far.
I assume we're at time at 2 p.m. So are we at time at 2 p.m.? We're so dependent on Maureen to keep us on track.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think we're just coming up to the hour, and I would say at this point, I think we've answered the questions that have come through. I don't think we've missed. Maybe we've got time for just one more.
Like, what types of engagement do we do on campus to support the collaboration? So internally, we have an international enrollment management stakeholder group that meets internally. So no study group in that, but it's our colleagues from admissions, some academic departments, graduate college, and we discuss together things like international recruitment plans, right? Where are we going to travel? How can we leverage our resources? What does study group have planned, and what do we do aside from study group? That's one example. We also make sure to invite our partners to our signature events, International Education Week, our graduation event for international students, our open houses, just so that they can share in, in our common success, I would say. And I will pass it back to Alex to wrap up with a few words about the case study that study group published, and I think we will wrap up after that.
Thank you, Mihaela. And yeah, so first of all, thank you all for the time and the participation today. It's been great to have these conversations. Thank you for the questions, and also the contribution to the polls and the word cloud. It's reassuring to see the content that's coming out from this group, because it shows that we're all on and aligned in a similar track. If you'd like to know a little bit more about what we've done, aside from hearing myself and Mihaela today, there is on the screen right now. If you're able to get your phone up to the screen, you can download the case study with the QR code. There's also a link with the website link that you'll be able to download it, and we'll send an email afterwards as well for this if you're unable from both of those methods, and you'll be able to link to it directly. Once again, thank you very much. We really appreciate all of your time today, wherever you are in the world. We hope that this has been productive. We wanted it to be not just a talk shop from Mihaela and myself, but something that practically is helpful, at least gets thinking going, and can enable conversations to continue. And for those of you, I saw in the chat that some of you will be at NAFSA. Great. We're there too. Look forward to seeing you there as well and continuing any conversations. Come and see us by the booth. We're at booth 2410.